A reading from the letter to the Romans. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay," says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This is the word of the Lord.
If you had access to a time machine, would you be willing to navigate the glittering wealth, abject poverty, and dazzlingly complex social structures of early 20th century England? Could you survive in the Edwardian world of Downton Abbey? This is the question posed by Manor House, a reality show/documentary which in 2003 gave a group of contemporary British men and women the chance to answer that question by inhabiting the full spectrum of life in a massive Edwardian country estate. Now, Manor House features a lot of the canned drama that you would expect from an early 2000s reality show. I mean, several of the maids quit after only 3 days in the house. But it also features a deeper kind of drama, the kind of complex human drama that illuminates our relationships to power, wealth, and our fellow human beings. So take, for example, John Olive Cooper, the seemingly normal middle-class businessman who is chosen by the show to become Sir John and the Lord of the Manor. Over the course of the show, we watch him grow into his role as Sir John, clad all in Harris tweed with his chest and his mustache somehow puffed out. We watch him frequently fishing in his private lake, or learning how to hunt foxes with other blue bloods, or walking around pipe in hand, fondly reminiscing about an empire that he never actually experienced. Then there are others, like John's sister-in-law Avril, who find Edwardian England far more difficult to manage. See, Avril is an unmarried woman, and as such, she has no regular companions, and the gender norms of that time period confine her to the most basic of small talk when the occasional guest does happen to drop by. The anxiety of the isolation that Avril experiences is so overwhelming that her 21st century doctor intervenes and actually prescribes an extended leave of absence from the show for the sake of her mental health. So more than just the bare details of what it would have looked like to live in an Edwardian household, Manor House does something even more important. It illuminates for us the incredible power of class and role, demonstrating that people can grow or shrink to fill the roles we assign to them. People can grow or shrink to fill the roles we assign to them. Now, you may be thinking, what on earth does this have to do with the way we read Romans 12? And actually, it has rather a lot to do with it, because Romans 12, especially the latter half, which we have just heard read, contains within it a blueprint for a particular and even potentially foreign way of living, a new kind of role, if you will. And it's a way of living that is marked, at least on the outset, by a lot of commands. Paul says, "Bless those who persecute you." And that's a particularly difficult one. And if you're like me, you can fall into the trap of thinking that Paul's words here are aimed not at me, but at someone else. Well, Martin Luther King, he can bless those who persecuted him, or Rosa Parks can bless those who persecuted her, but that's not really my jam. Or else we can sometimes fall victim to the increasing professionalization and stratification of the church. Weep with those who weep? No, you need to call a Stephen minister. I'm out of here. Even within the church, it seems, people shrink or grow to fit the roles we assign them. If we assign someone the role of Titanic hero, we expect them to do everything in this passage and then some, and we reserve every right to be upset when they fail. On the flip side, if we assign someone to the role of layperson or congregant or benevolence case or client, we often expect little and less from them, thinking that it's not their job, it's someone else's job, someone else's problem to solve, someone else's battle to fight. Now, I have a master's degree, and our senior pastor has a PhD, and the Stephen ministers in this congregation do excellent and vital work. I'm not going to stand up here this morning and pretend to you like I don't believe in a reasonable division of labor based on skill and giftedness and training. The Lord save us from an ignorant ministry, Jesse Mercer would say. I mean, even Paul, right before we pick up reading this morning, begins to make functional distinctions between certain spiritual gifts and skills, even as they are united in service to our one Lord. But the reality is, if we continue to draw arbitrary distinctions and divide the work up too neatly, we run the risk of professionalizing the church to death. And worse, we run the risk of being unfaithful to the gospel, especially as Paul presents it here in the book of Romans. Because to the church in Rome and to us across the vast gulf of space and time, Paul insists in this book that the good news of the gospel is that unlike the social structures of Edwardian England or the divided roles we sometimes assign in church, God saves and is saving us without any sense of partiality, without any attention to our roles or specializations or social class, without any attention to what we do or what we might one day do. In fact, Paul argues that God acts through Jesus while we ourselves are still so caught up in patterns of behavior and systems of evil that put us in stark opposition to the very way of Jesus. God shows no partiality, Paul proclaims in Romans 2, which is precisely why he can make the argument that the God of Israel now comes to the Gentiles in Rome, to the Gentiles in this room, and it is precisely why Romans is such good news. Because in Jesus Christ, God is reconciling all things, offering the free gift of salvation to everyone, breaking down the dividing wall, and inviting all of us into God's kingdom. Through Jesus Christ, all of us are welcome together in God's household, not as masters or as servants, but in one new universal role, the role of beloved. Now, Paul goes a little bit further in Romans 12, and you heard the first inkling of it last week when George talked about moving beyond nonconformity, because Paul insists that our experience of the radical good news of Jesus Christ requires a kind of radical living on our part in response to what God has done. The impartial love of God requires us to extend a radical and impartial love to others, to those who are also beloved of God. And this is the thrust of all of the commands in Romans 12, 9 through 21, that we are all of us asked to grow into our new roles as beloved, letting our love be genuine both within the community and without the community. We are all asked to rejoice in hope with all people. We are all asked to live in harmony with everyone as much as we possibly can. We are all asked to participate in God's mission of reconciliation in this world. Now, it sounds daunting, I know, we can be tempted to throw our hands up and take a step back and say, well, that's just not for me. Peacemaking, nonviolence, these things are not for me. But when I hear that, I find myself wondering, is it true that there are really people who are incapable of the kind of work that Romans asks of us? Or is that merely how we have been conditioned to imagine the world? I think a big part of it is conditioning. And I think some of that conditioning occurs on a very subtle level in the limitations of our English translations of the book of Romans. You see, several times in this passage, Paul uses words that most English Bibles translate as you, singular, other. And it reinforces what we've already been talking about, that you, the hero, or you, the professional, you bless those who curse you, but me, I can't do that. You're the professional, I am not. Now, it took me a while to learn this because I grew up in Wyoming, where this word is not particularly common, but every time you see the word you in Romans 12, 9 through 21, I want you to replace it with the word y'all. Proper Edwardian English fails to capture the fullness of what Paul is trying to communicate because in Greek, he uses a one-word, second-person plural pronoun, which we don't have in proper English, but which we have in good old-fashioned Southern English. It's the word y'all. Paul's pronouns even are starting to reflect the new theology that he declares in Romans. He isn't operating in a world neatly divided up into atomized individuals into a bunch of yous. Paul in Romans is saying y'all. In fact, you might go so far as to say that Paul is saying all y'all. The super plural. Which, by the way, and this is an important point, doesn't mean all y'all and not me. Paul is the one who is saying y'all this morning, not Aaron, because I am included in the y'all. We are all in this together. I too have much to learn from this text this morning. I too need the reminder that Christianity does not belong to religious professionals like me or to titanic heroes of the faith like Rosa Parks. Because the reality is, the whole reason that we are here this morning is because we are all beloved together. God is saving all of us together, and God is empowering all of us together for this good work. And I don't know about y'all, but to me, that is extremely comforting. The idea that Paul is not saying you, the individual, but all y'all, all of us, is extremely comforting because it means we can lean on each other when we get tired. It means that those of us who have more strength can support the other, that we can share and go about the good work of God's kingdom together. And there's something else about all of this that is even more comforting to me, and it is the realization that as daunting and intimidating as it may seem to look at this passage and imagine yourself fulfilling all of these commandments at once, the work is not nearly as hard as most of us think it is. Because born out of the transformation that Jesus Christ has wrought in our own lives, we all have the capacity to grow and fill this role of beloved. A couple of years ago, Pope Francis said it this way: the saints are not supermen, nor were they born perfect. They are like us, like each one of us. They are people who, before reaching the glory of heaven, lived normal lives, filled with joys and sorrows, struggles and hopes. Being holy is not a privilege for the few, as if someone had a large inheritance. But in baptism, we all have an inheritance to be able to become saints. Now, our brothers and sisters in the Catholic Church arguably lionize their heroes more than any other segment of our big Christian family, yet even they know that the work of holy living, the work described in Romans 12, is not the exclusive domain of professionals or heroes. We are all of us called in salvation, in baptism, in vocation, to begin growing into a new role as beloved children of God, living a life that honors and reflects and shares what God has done for us through Jesus Christ. And like the saints, either old or new, none of us is made perfect in a flash. We are given the grace to progress. We learn to crawl, and then to walk, and then to run. So consider with me the story of Rosa Parks, who I've already mentioned several times this morning. If your primary school education was anything like mine, you probably remember learning about Rosa Parks as this titanic hero of the civil rights movement, someone who, in a tremendous act of will and courage, made this instantaneous decision to sit down on a bus and thereby launch the Montgomery bus boycott. Problem is, that story is not entirely true. Now, don't get me wrong, Rosa Parks was a woman of will and courage, but I'm not entirely sure she had much more than the rest of us. I think what secured Rosa Parks' place in history was her willingness to grow into her role as a beloved child of God. Her dogged insistence that she would continue to do the faithful work along the way. Because 12 years before the boycott, while Martin Luther King was still in high school, Rosa Parks joined her local NAACP chapter. And she fought for several years with the misogynistic president of the chapter to even become the secretary, a role that she served faithfully for many, many years. And Rosa Parks went to Tennessee, to the Highlander Folk School, where she learned with other civil rights activists the techniques and strategies necessary to engage in the kind of civil disobedience that they believed would secure their rights. When she got back to Montgomery, she tried to register to vote 3 painful times before finally being successful. And it's only after this period of 12 long, faithful years that Rosa Parks has this moment on the bus and emerges on the national scene as a woman that we remember today, because she continually grew into her role as a beloved child of God. Or, in a slightly different vein, maybe call to mind some of the stories that you've seen on the news or on social media this week emerging in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. Stories about people learning how to love without distinction in the wake of an incredible tragedy. Maybe you've heard the story of Father David Bergeron, a Roman Catholic priest who spent last Sunday morning kayaking around South Houston, trying to find people who were stranded so that he could pray and have church with them. Or maybe you've heard about Austin Pets Alive, a group that is investing tremendous resources and risking their own lives to rescue animals who have been stranded in homes or in shelters by the floodwaters. Surely you've heard by now the stories, almost too many to count, of first responders and ordinary citizens springing into action, diving into water they don't know the depth of, and rescuing their fellow human beings without asking any questions about political affiliations or ideological beliefs or religious convictions. The people all along the Gulf Coast who are jumping in even when they don't know exactly what they are doing, are living testimonies for us this morning of people who are learning to live into their role as beloved children of God, people who are loving indiscriminately and with all of the strength that they have. Because, friends, we are all called to that same good work. Not as a way to earn God's love or to pay off the salvation that we have experienced, but rather as an outpouring of our transformed lives, because we are, in fact, now God's beloved. And the good news this morning is that we are not called to do it by ourselves or all at once or in the blink of an eye, because we are all in this together, y'all, and we are learning together, stumbling together with as much light as we have to see the next step in front of us, taking baby steps before we learn to walk and run. The good news is that we don't have to become Rosa Parks or Martin King overnight, because even they did not become Rosa Parks and Martin King overnight. There is grace to take a baby step. So, have the events in Charlottesville over the last few weeks stirred up something in you? You can take a baby step and join your local NAACP chapter. Or if the stories from Houston and the rest of the Gulf Coast continue to break your heart, you can take a baby step and donate to the relief efforts, even through Wilshire's website if you want to. Or you can take a slightly larger step and send an email to Timothy Peoples and ask him about the relief efforts that Wilshire is organizing for when the floodwaters in Houston finally recede. Whatever it is in your own life, you can take a baby step this morning. Because at the end of the day, y'all, Jesus is calling us, all of us together, to grow into a new role as beloved and redeemed children of God, tasked with God's profound and indiscriminate mission of reconciliation in this world. And because of the transformation that we have experienced in the love and grace of Jesus Christ, I think we are up for the task. Amen.